Good evening. This is Tuesday evening, the 8th of March, 2022. Tomorrow morning I'm up early and we're off to Mount Vernon, 35 miles away, and I will have the cataract surgery on my left eye. I'm sure everything will go well, so here's keeping our fingers crossed, trusting in modern medicine. We're living in interesting times, as the old Chinese curse that we hear about. May you live in interesting times. For the last 2 weeks, we certainly have. A good friend, a fellow who's an amateur writer that I've done a lot of editing for and some encouragement and some tips, sent me an email at the end of February. Very short. I'm sorry. Isn't this where I came in? Didn't I grow up with leaders tossing words back and forth while we killed other people that we weren't necessarily yelling at? I need to cancel my subscription to Adult. Please. And that was the end of his email. And I understood, and as I usually do, I sat down and I sent back a whole barrage of words in an email answer. And as the days have gone by, I've decided this one is one I'd like to share. So here we go. Sorry to say, I feel that I've lived too long, so long that it's all coming back around. As a kid, we grew up with Westerns, the movies and the Saturday radio serials. Tom Mix, Red Ryder, Hopalong Cassidy, Roy Rogers, The Lone Ranger, and others. And it seemed like every boy on the block had a 6-shooter cap pistol and maybe even the complete gun belt and the holster outfit. And we neighborhood boys played cowboys and Indians, with the Indians being assigned rather arbitrarily. My point, a plot meme was always that the outlaw gangs rode into town, shot the place up, sometimes shooting the sheriff and his deputies, and then they terrorized the townspeople and started looting the local businesses and the bank, of course. It always seemed to take a hero like the Lone Ranger or Red Ryder or Roy Rogers to ride into town on their white horse, confront the outlaws, and restore peace and justice. Interestingly, never ever was there the idea of the neighboring towns banding together to deal with the outlaw gangs. About the only cooperative effort was the ubiquitous and usually ineffective town posse that would hastily assemble and ride off willy-nilly in a huge cloud of fruitless effort. And sometimes they'd catch the wrong hombre and not discover their error until after they'd strung him up from the nearest tree. So I and countless other kids grew up on this cultural hogwash. Now, Russia is the outlaw gang, led by a psychopathic thug, the outlaw leader. He's after loot and territorial dominance. The neighboring countries are terrified of getting involved. They seem to think that if they can only keep their heads down, they'll be safe. And maybe the outlaw gang will be satisfied with what they've already stolen. Meanwhile, the hero is tired, broke, and confused with two minds about everything, including the hero role. So, our hero has resorted to indirect disciplines, like "we don't approve" sanctions, and vigorous finger-wagging in the thug's direction. I was born in 1940. The U.S. had spent a number of years steadfastly looking anywhere but at Hitler and his growing threat. We shook our fingers most vigorously as Hitler began a systematic conquest of Europe and the Middle East and parts of Africa. We only assumed the hero role when we were attacked and our Pacific Fleet was destroyed. We had little choice. No politician dared hesitate to commit. It would be too cowardly and embarrassing. Now it was our business. Our security was threatened, and it was no longer just a problem over there. So, Russia and China, like World War II, Germany and Japan and Italy, are become fellow travelers with a mutual interests agreement. Still, not our problem. China now dominates a major global sea route, the South China Sea, and China deigns to let others transit or extract ocean resources as it allows. China is also tightening a noose around its breakaway province, Taiwan, and is waiting for a moment of opportunity to bring it back into the fold, either absorbing it or perhaps by force if needed. I fear that any effort by the U.S. to extend our fleet into the South China Sea to honor our treaty promises with Taiwan will be a bloody disaster for us. China has spent decades now turning the South China Sea into a fortress, while we have looked the other way. Russia will probably conquer Ukraine. The bloodshed will be horrific. The people will not submit. They'll resist. They'll finally engage in house-to-house fighting in the cities, in urban guerrilla warfare and other tactics. And the ongoing human tragedy will be simply unspeakable. And it will not stop there. There is no cowboy hero to ride in and save the day, and the cowering neighbors will probably remain cowering their fate. It's also interesting that as this happens, Russia is the chair country of the United Nations Security Council. And that's about as appropriate as the Grand Kleagle of the KKK serving as Mississippi Attorney General. Ironic, isn't it? We've ignored the flaws in our global community all these decades. Disaster after disaster, and we still haven't learned to make the effort to enforce world peace and stability. We're still committed to the idea of a hero riding in to save the day. We seem to hope that just maybe the outlaw gang, sated with its looting and gorging, will drink itself into a stupor, and thus distracted, we can all slip away to safety. I've lived too damn long. The cowboy hero was a lousy plot line then, and it's really no better now. Take care, my friend. Avoid watching too much breaking news. Therein lies a path to insanity. Graybird. That was my letter. Nothing much has happened since then to change the mind. Actually, I'm a bit more convinced that's the path it will go. It's encouraging to see that the neighboring towns, that is, the neighboring countries, seem to be rallying together. But it's also very unsettling to me that simply because Putin has nuclear weapons at hand, he uses them as a threat. And suddenly we're saying, no, we cannot get directly involved. After all, he has nuclear weapons. So then I wonder, if he rolls into Moldova, neighboring to the Crimean Peninsula and on the southern edge of Ukraine, if we then say, well, Moldova is not a NATO member, so it's not worth getting directly involved. After all, he has nuclear weapons. So then perhaps he just goes on up the side of the line there and winds up taking in NATO countries like Poland. What then will we do? We will say, please, Mr. Putin, do not use your nuclear weapons and start a world catastrophe, but we must militarily intervene because this time you are taking too much. I don't know. Where does it stop? Where does the threat of a madman holding a nuclear weapon in his hand and shaking it at us, how far does that threat extend? Is it a passport to unlimited lawlessness? Or is it simply a situation where we have no choice but to call the bluff and pray that it is a bluff? Honestly, I don't know. But I do agree with my good friend. I think we've both lived too long and we've seen too much. Thanks. Goodbye.